Welcome to The Bottom Line with John Harrison, your tour guide through all things financial. Build out your financial skill set with crucial knowledge and tactics and easy to follow answers to all your essential money questions. And now, your host, certified financial planner, ordained minister, multi-published author, and president of Aspire Financial Advisors, John Harrison.
Hello, and welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm John F. Harrison, your host, and in this episode, I want to discuss an important date. Do you know what May 14th, 2023 is? It's Tax Freedom Day. It's the day the average American can stop working to pay his taxes and actually starts getting to keep the money that he or she is earning. May 14th, we're almost halfway through the year before we've paid for our government for the year. They say there's only two things that are certain in life, and that's death and taxes. They also say the difference between death and taxes is that death doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. You know, there's another date I'd like to mention, and that's April 19th. Massachusetts and Maine are the only two states that celebrate it, but it's Patriots' Day. It's the date when, in 1775, the tensions between the 13 colonies and Great Britain overflowed into a shooting war. And one of the bones of contention was taxes. The country fought a revolution over a tax burden that's far smaller than the one we carry today. So our goal is to see if we can't make your Tax Freedom Day come a little earlier than the average person's. Do you want to lower your tax bill? Want to know how all this fits together? Stay tuned. We'll take care of a little business right quick, and when we come back, we'll dive into tax freedom on the other side.
People say I've got a great smile. Well, I have to say, this is all thanks to the professional team at Beacon Dental Group right here in Dorchester, Massachusetts. I've got world-class dental care. Beacon Dental Group has expert and caring staff dedicated to providing the most advanced and satisfactory treatment in all aspects of oral health. Their services are designed to meet your needs and give you a perfect smile, too. General checkups, cosmetic surgery, Gemini laser service, and advanced procedures, all in a state-of-the-art facility. Call or visit Beacon Dental Group today, 1026 Blue Hill Avenue, Dorchester, Massachusetts, or call 617-282-2146 for a smile that lights the world.
Welcome back. We're talking about taxes, and I thought maybe the best place to start was with a little history of American taxation. When we weren't yet our own country, when we were still 13 colonies, Great Britain decided that we weren't paying our fair share of taxes to reimburse them for their 7 years war with France. Britain figured that we benefited from it. We in the colonies had been skirmishing with the French off and on for some time. And after the war was over, the British actually started garrisoning troops here on what is now U.S. soil, allegedly to keep us safe from threats from the Native Americans. Well, in any case, they decided that since we were benefiting from all that, we should start paying for it. So they started imposing taxes, beginning with the Stamp Act of 1764. And it required a tax stamp for basically any documents, everything from wills and trusts to pamphlets, newspapers, even playing cards had to get a tax stamp. And the colonists resisted it so badly, they repealed it the next year. But they decided to flex their muscles and assert their right to tax us wherever and however they wanted to. This eventually led to the tea tax of 1773, whereas tea was becoming a popular drink in Europe and also here in the colonies. And it could be imported from the Dutch without taxation, but British tea had a pretty steep 25% surtax on it, and Britain passed a law requiring us to buy tea only from Britain. We had to import it only from Britain. And the result was a famous historical incident, the Boston Tea Party, where a group of people called the Sons of Liberty dumped all the British tea into Boston Harbor. And these were just some of the tax protests that led up to the firing of those first shots in 1775 that ended up with us becoming our own nation. Well, today, 250 years after the events of the 1770s, we have so many more taxes than what they ended up fighting a revolution over. And I just think of today's tax not as the stamp tax, not as the tea tax, but as the everything tax, because there are so many that we pay. Let me give you a quick survey. State taxes on gasoline range from 9 cents a gallon in Alaska to 65 cents a gallon in California, and that's on top of the federal gas tax of 18.4 cents a gallon. Here in Massachusetts, where I'm recording this from, the combined tax on gasoline is 24 cents for the state plus 18.4 for the feds, for a total of 42 cents a gallon. When you go to the gas pump in this state, 42 cents of every dollar you pay for gas is taxes. And it doesn't stop there. If you're traveling, there are travel taxes. 7.5% federal tax, for instance, on airline tickets. You buy an airplane ticket, you add that 7.5% for the government. Hotel rooms have 5.7% taxes here. Every state does it. It varies in terms of amount by state. And then individual cities like Boston, Cambridge, Worcester, Springfield, Chicopee, add another 2.75% to the state 5.7, as does Cape Cod and the islands, to benefit different things. With Worcester, it's the Convention Bureau. With the Cape, it's preservation. But everybody's getting a little piece of everything that you do. Speaking of which, let's talk about licenses and fees, because those are really taxes, even if we don't call them that. It's a hidden fee. Back in the 1950s, 5% of U.S. workers needed to acquire and pay for a license to do whatever their job was. Now nearly 30% of workers have to pay for a state license to do whatever their job is. Basically, the state figures out what it is people want to do and then finds a way to charge them for doing that. Some of these licenses seem a little bit odd to me. Why do you need a state license to arrange flowers? But a florist does. And if a florist has a thriving business in one state and moves to another one, they've got to start all over again because they're not licensed in that state. So it's just another way to impose a tax. And then there's all the taxes that first come to mind when we say the word tax. Sales tax on goods. All but 6 states have them. So you go to the store, you buy something, and they state tax on a little extra so that you can exercise the privilege of spending your own money on stuff. Property taxes. You own a piece of real estate, the government charges you annually for the right to own it. Automobile excise taxes. It's not enough that when you buy a car, new or used, you pay sales tax on the purchase, because we've already mentioned sales taxes, but then once you own it, you pay an annual tax, typically to your town, for the right to continue owning and operating it. You fail to pay your excise tax on a car, which in Massachusetts is $25 per thousand of value of the vehicle, then they simply cancel your registration or refuse to let you renew your license. So taxes, taxes, and more taxes. Estate taxes and or inheritance taxes. An estate tax is a tax on the right of a decedent, i.e. a person who has died, to pass their wealth, to pass their belongings on to other people. Estate taxes exist on the federal level, and they also exist on the state level. Some states have, rather than an estate tax, An inheritance tax, the only difference is who pays it. If it's an estate tax, the estate of the decedent pays it. If it's an inheritance tax, the person getting the inheritance pays it. So you end up with a situation where somebody has worked and paid income taxes and payroll taxes on their earnings, and then invested the difference and pays capital gains taxes on the gains they made during their life, and then they ultimately pass away, and either they or the inheritors pay a tax on the right for the money to be shifted to the next person. It just never seems to stop. Again, my point was, this country fought a revolution over a tax burden that's not a fraction of the taxes that we pay today, and they are by far the biggest ongoing expense that we have, cumulatively speaking. Maybe not any one thing, the income tax or the property tax, but cumulatively speaking, they're the biggest thing that we pay. There's all sorts of special taxes, sin taxes on things that the government maybe wants to discourage people from buying. There are payroll taxes that we mentioned, which is how Social Security is funded. If you're an employee, you know that 7.65% comes out of your check in order to cover Social Security and Medicare. The Social Security portion of that is up to what's called a wage base. This year, in 2023, it's $160,200. So once you've earned more than $160,200 for the year, they'll stop withholding Social Security tax, although the Medicare portion of that 7.65% keeps going, because that's to the moon. So that tax will never go away. But we pay a pretty big chunk for Social Security. And if you're self-employed, you not only pay the 7.65% as if you were an employee, but you also pay a matching 7.65%, which is what your employer, if you're not self-employed, pays for you. So the total is 15.3, and self-employed people pay the whole 15.3. It's just, are you getting the impression that there are a lot of taxes out there? If so, I'm doing my job, because that's not even all of them. But that's a little bit about what we pay. And just looking at the one we have most control over, the income tax, that's the one that we can maybe most affect what we pay. And that's the one whose tax freedom day is May 14th. So now that I have your attention about taxes, let's figure out how we can lower your tax bill a little bit. That'll be next. We're going to take a quick break to take care of some business here. And when we come back, we'll talk about the income tax and how you can lower yours. Stay tuned.
Do you want to make a bold statement? Do you want to stand out in the room? Check in with us before you step out. On-demand designs and timeless statement pieces are here to channel your impeccable style from this season to the next. You can have it all, so go get it and be confident when you do. Jewels on Demand, inspiring elegance and confidence.
Welcome back to The Bottom Line. We have been talking about taxes, and I hope to this point I've gotten your attention about just how much of every dollar you make goes to some sort of tax or another. Whether it's the income tax, the payroll tax, sales taxes, excise taxes, and who knows how many other kinds, we all pay what I believe is more than our fair share in taxes. But now I want to focus precisely on the income tax, because we're going to get into tax reduction strategies. But before I do, let me add one more thing. You ever wonder who pays all the income taxes? If you listen to politicians who are trying to get your vote for some office or another, you'd get the impression that average working class and middle class people carry the lion's share of the tax burden, and that successful wealthy people don't pay any taxes. And so you're always being told, if you elect me, I will get the rich to pay their fair share. There's two things that politicians who say that never tell you. One, they never tell you how much they think is the affluent person's fair share. They never put a number on it because they always want it to be more than whatever it is. And the second thing they never tell you, besides how much is a fair share, is how much of the current tax burden the affluent already pay. So let's take a look at that. And these aren't figures from a political source. This is from the IRS. What the IRS says is that in 2020, which is the most recent year that I've got the breakdown for, the top 1% of taxpayers, that is people who earned $548,000 or more of adjusted gross income every year, paid 42% of all the income taxes that are paid in the country. So as much as we'd like to run around thinking that, hey, the 1% doesn't pay any taxes, actually the 1% pays 42% of all taxes. And it keeps going. If you expand the window to the top 5%, and people in the top 5% of earners are those who earn $220,000 or more per year, they, combined with the 1%, pay 62% of all income taxes. The top 10% are people who earn $152,000 or more. Now, you may be noticing here, we're rapidly getting out of the territory that people would call, rich, but above 152,000, you're still in the top percent of all income earners. And that cohort pays 73% of all income taxes. So people who make 152,000 or more, they're only the top 10% of the tax-paying population, but they pay 72% of all taxes. Meanwhile, the bottom 50%, those who earn $42,000 per year or less, pay 2% of all income taxes. So it's one of those things that doesn't come up much, but it's a good thing to know, because one of the first things I'm convinced is necessary for us to get ahead as individuals is to focus on bettering ourselves and better managing ourselves, and not focus on envy and malice directed toward other people. So rather than resenting the fact that there are people who earn more than I do and demanding that the government make them pay more than they do, I kind of need to acknowledge that, again, the top 10% of all wage earners pay 75% of all taxes, and the bottom 50% pays 2% of all taxes. So the system is not rigged unfairly the way we're told it is. It's simply way too much in terms of taxes for everybody, because the income tax is just one of many. There were 60 million tax returns, by the way, in this country in 2020 with no tax liability at all. And 94% of those were people making less than $50,000 a year. So there are people who don't pay taxes, but it's generally not the rich. If you're someone who pays taxes, I'm hoping at this point you are interested in making your tax freedom day come sooner, i.e. you pay less taxes than you have been. Let's talk about tax reduction strategies and how you might do that. There's not much you can do about most of the kinds of taxes that we pay. You can't really do much to get around excise taxes or sales taxes or things of that nature, but you can do something about income taxes, and a very few people can do something about payroll taxes. What do I mean by that? People who run a business, people who own a business, have to pay FICA taxes. It gets paid twice. The employee pays it, and the employer pays it, 7.65 times 2. And if you are the employee of the business, you're the business owner, that can be a bit of a burden. If you set your company up as S corporation tax status, it is possible to take some of your income as a distribution from the corporation rather than a salary. If it comes out as a distribution, it is not subject to payroll taxes, and therefore you can avoid that FICA hit on a portion of your earnings. Now, you can't overdo this. The IRS does scrutinize S corporation tax returns to make sure that the owner is drawing a reasonable salary, reasonable for the occupation that they're in, reasonable for the revenue that the company is taking in. So if the company's paying you, $95,000 a year, you can't make 80 of that a distribution and 15 of it salary, they would consider that unreasonable. But you can use that technique to reduce your payroll taxes if you're a business owner. But for the vast majority of us who are not perhaps owning a business of our own or involved in a situation where we can decide the tax treatment of our payroll, there are some tax reduction strategies that we can use to affect our taxes. And to talk about those, I need to highlight the difference between a tax deduction and a tax credit. One is far more powerful than the other. Here's the difference. $1 of tax deduction lowers your actual tax bill anywhere from 10 cents to 37 cents, depending on what tax bracket you're in. If you're in the 10% bracket, then $1 of tax deduction cuts your tax bill 10 cents. If you're in the 37% bracket, $1 of tax deduction cuts your tax bill 37 cents. And somewhere in between, depending on whether you're in the 10, 12, 22, so on and so forth. But that's what a tax deduction does. A tax credit is far more powerful because $1 of tax credit reduces your tax bill a whole dollar. So a credit is more powerful than a tax deduction. There are even things called refundable tax credits, meaning you can get a credit for taxation that reduces your liability below zero and gets you a refund when you actually didn't have a tax liability at all. There are people who don't pay taxes but get a check from the government, and that's essentially wealth redistribution from people who pay taxes to people who don't. But if you are qualified for a tax credit, I would certainly advise you to take it, especially if it's refundable. You want to take advantage of anything and everything that's available to you. But again, small attitude check. If you are going to take advantage of every provision of the tax code that's available to you, then don't be surprised when other people do it, when people who have more money than you do it. In other words, don't call it a loophole when somebody else is taking advantage of the same kinds of things that we are. So here are some specific tax reduction strategies that the average person can look into. And the first one is so obvious I feel a little bit funny saying it, but it's worth pointing out. When you do your taxes, if you don't have someone do them for you, when your taxes get complicated, you're probably better off having a CPA do them for you. But if you're doing your own taxes, that's okay, especially if they're very straightforward and simple. But do use tax prep software like TaxAct or TurboTax or any number of programs that are out there to complete your taxes. Two reasons. There are so many credits and so many deductions, each of which has its own set of rules as to who qualifies and what they're for, what your income limits are for taking them. There's simply no way you can keep them all straight. You can spend some time, as I do, on the IRS website and read about dozens and dozens of available tax credits: the retirement savings contribution credit, adoption credit, clean vehicles and energy credits, child tax credits. They go on and they go on. Better to use the software which will quiz you in such a way that it determines, hey, you should look at this credit or that credit, and that way you don't miss any. Also, it's a statistical fact that people who do their taxes by hand get audited more than people who use the software. So if you're not using software yet, by all means start. We're in that age now where really nobody should be doing taxes by hand, and it'll find you some savings. Strategy number 2, contribute to a retirement plan. Now, what kind has a big impact on your taxes? Traditionally, what we've meant by contribute to a retirement plan is contribute to a tax-deductible retirement plan. A traditional IRA, a traditional 401k, lets you reduce your taxable income by the amount of the contribution, saving you on your tax bill this year. But that may not be the most powerful strategy, because now, and for several years, we've had the Roth approach, the Roth IRA, and more companies are offering Roth contributions in their 401ks and 403bs. Why is that important? Because the general principle is a tax break on a large sum of money is worth more than a tax break on a small sum of money. That seems obvious, but here's the application. When you do a traditional contribution, a traditional IRA, a traditional 401k, you get the tax break on the small sum, your contribution. You get a deduction for that, which lowers your tax bill by some percentage. Then the money you've contributed grows over the years, and when you withdraw it in retirement, it is fully taxable at whatever the tax rates are then. Do we know what the tax rates will be then? No, we don't. So what you've got with a traditional setup is a silent partner in your retirement account, Uncle Sam. And years from now, when you go to take money out of the account, Uncle Sam will tell you then how much of your withdrawal he wants. So the alternative to that is the Roth treatment. You get no tax break now on the small contribution, but the money grows, and provided you play by the rules, then it all comes out tax-free. So you never pay, in other words, you're not paying tax on your growth later, which is what tax deferral is. You're paying tax on your growth never, which is what tax-free is. And tax-free is always better than tax deferred. The more things you can contribute to with a tax break, the better off you'll be. Contribute to a 529 plan. Consider deferring income if it means you can shift it into a year when it won't be taxed at the next highest tax bracket. Tax loss harvesting on your investments. There's a million things you can do. The important thing is to get some advice and counsel on what might be available to you. If you can move your tax freedom day up, then you get to keep more of the money you make. And that sounds like a good idea to me. Hey, stay tuned for some exciting news just on the other side of this break, and we'll wrap things up and put a bow on it. See you in a minute.
The Well Jamaican Restaurant, located at 55 Mazzio Drive in Randolph, Mass., where good food and fellowship meet daily. Check out our variety of fresh and tasty entrees and sides from our menu or the website, thewellja.com, like our jerk chicken, oxtails and rice, seafood, desserts, and more. With our drinks and juices made fresh daily, you have the option to dine in or take out. We can also cater your special event, or you can book our private dining room and let us host your special event. At the Well Jamaican Restaurant, we pride ourselves on providing superior quality food and beverages, and of course, great customer service. Next time you're in the mood for Jamaican cuisine, meet us at the Well Jamaican Restaurant. Become part of the family. Connect with us on Facebook and Instagram. The Well, where good food and fellowship meet daily.
So we talked about taxes, and we could talk about taxes for hours. It's a huge subject, both in terms of how the taxes work and things you can do to beat them. We might have future shows on this. I feel like doing a tax freedom show every year, a tax freedom day show. But what I wanted to do today was maybe light a bit of a fire in your spirit. See if you can get motivated to do something about your tax bill. It's one of the biggest bills that we pay, and I don't want you to be the person who strains at gnats and swallows camels and obsesses over the expenses in ETFA versus ETFB and ignores the tax ramifications. So those are things to think about. Hey, I also want to announce that we've got a special treat for you next episode, and you won't want to miss it. We're going to have our very first guest on the show, and I won't tell you who now, but it's somebody you'll want to hear from, especially if you've ever thought of starting your own business. It's going to be a very exciting time, so do join us then. And in the meantime, keep in mind what I always say. However daunting, however complex all these financial concepts can seem to be, you can get from here to there, wherever there is for you. Wherever it is you're trying to go, you can get from here to there. You just need a little direction for the journey, and that's the bottom line.